On this 79th anniversary coming up, October 10th, we celebrate the birth of Thelonious Monk. He's a difficult kind of character to sketch out and to fill in. And we're going to talk to a producer who worked with him from 1955 to 1961, specifically under the banner of Riverside. Orrin Keepnews is out in San Francisco. Thank you, Orrin, for taking time.
Well, it's always good to talk with you, and it's always good, as it always has been, to get some thoughts off my mind and out of my mouth about Thelonious, who, as I have never been hesitant about saying, although he might not have enjoyed the concept of himself as a teacher, he was my first and best teacher as a producer. That's a subject that I've had conversation with another student, another pupil of Thelonious, is Sonny Rollins. We've talked on numerous occasions. Sonny prefers to think of Monk rather than as a teacher, prefers to think of him as a guru, in the sense that you can define a guru as somebody who helps you bring out the best in yourself. So literally, I learned on my feet. I learned by paying attention to him, by trying to get action out of him. I learned that he was Monk, for instance, was reputedly an eccentric. He probably indeed was sincerely an eccentric, but he was above all a genius. And he was a man. I think probably the key to understanding Monk in the studio turned out to be that Thelonious really sincerely did not believe that his music was all that difficult. He didn't have any trouble understanding it. He found it very hard to understand how talented, experienced musicians could have a hard time with it. I remember a wonderful phrase I will never forget came on an occasion when Monk was in the studio on a project that Coleman Hawkins was a part of, and Coleman Hawkins was having trouble with a line of Monk's composition, and Thelonious said to him, and this language is exact, so listen up to it. He said, "You're supposed to be the great Coleman Hawkins. How come you're having this trouble?" It wasn't "you are the great Coleman Hawkins," it's "you're supposed to be the great Coleman Hawkins." And the great Coleman Hawkins, like a lot of other people, found Monk's music really hard to get with. I said on another occasion that Monk makes the same kind of demands on other people as he makes on himself, and that's probably rather unfair of him.
How about the music materials that you worked with, whether they were standards or they were his own works?
For the most part, I mean, he worked with standards occasionally. For the most part, they were his own compositions, and on occasions there were lead sheets. On occasions, the musicians were just supposed to learn by Thelonious playing it for them or talking it out with them. And he was, as I say, very impatient. He worked with talented people. He didn't understand why they couldn't get with it right away. It made for some sticky situations. I learned, for instance, that, and this is a very difficult thing, a lot of producers, I think, have never gotten around to learning this. The artist is what the record is supposed to be all about. It's not supposed to be an example of how brilliant you are. It's supposed to be an example of what kind of results you can produce from that artist. Can you get the best out of him? Well, there was never any possibility of my confusing which one of us was the most important. I knew what my job was. My job was to make him be as comfortable as possible, to make him be as creative as he possibly could be, to make it possible for all these things to come spewing out of him under the right circumstances, in the right environment. And that is the most important lesson you can learn as a record producer, certainly in jazz.
Orrin Keepnews, how did you generate that feeling of comfort for Thelonious?
I think you do it by making the man, I did it by making the man feel that I appreciated, that to a degree I understood what his goals were, what it was he was trying to do, by succeeding in making him understand that despite the fact that I was a white record company operative, I was on his side. And apparently, since we worked together for 6 years, and came up with some extremely valuable albums. Apparently I did convince him of that. If I did, it was because of the absolute sincerity of that.
Stand by, will you, Orrin? And let's talk about Thelonious's importance as a founding father, his influence, the impact, as you described, the Mississippi River, the summer season, the Alp imagery, and was he a revolutionary? We'll talk about that in our next segment. And this is the night when we salute Thelonious Monk. On October 10th, we celebrated, in the year 1996, his 79th anniversary, the anniversary of his birth. He was born in Rocky Mountain, North Carolina, and he died in Weehawken, New Jersey, February 17th, 1982. His legacy? Well, let's talk about that legacy. Who better to talk about it than Orrin Keepnews, who has done reissue projects on the Columbia Masters that Teo Macero produced, but also in the years between 1955 and 1961 at Riverside, he produced a body of work that is history. Orrin Keepnews, the importance of Thelonious Monk.
Well, the importance of Thelonious Monk is frequently underestimated, cannot be overestimated. Thelonious was, I think I've already made the statement, the flat-out statement that he was a genius, but I think in many respects his influence is most strongly felt in the fact that it has survived. The influence has survived and thrived long after the man himself has been taken from us. One of the things I said shortly after he died, I predicted accurately that we were going to hear a lot more of his music being played, because now he wasn't around to criticize the people who played it wrong. And that has happened. There's an awful lot of Monk being played, frequently, not too accurately, but such is the strength of that music, such is the exploratory nature of that music, that I think even people playing Monk badly produce valuable results.
You once said that there is a paradox here in Monk's work. Was he a revolutionary, or was he attached to an old-fashioned root of one kind or another?
Well, let me put it this way. I've never felt, once I got to know him even slightly, I never really felt that he was a revolutionary, in the sense that revolutionaries, generally speaking, tear down the existing order in order to build a new one. And I think I've also said that if you are a revolutionary within your own activities, you carry the seeds of your eventually being replaced and somebody else coming along with a further revolution to unseat yours. Monk, in that sense, was not a revolutionary, because Monk built on the past. Monk was deeply aware, for example, of the music of Duke Ellington. He was deeply aware of stride piano and of the work of James P. Johnson, who he admired greatly. I think there's one of my Monk stories is of listening to a playback of a blues, a solo piano blues that Monk had just performed in the studio. We're standing in the control room listening to the playback, and Monk turned to me with a very satisfied look on his face, and he said, "I sound just like James P. Johnson," which he took to be a great compliment to himself. So, he built on the past. He went into the future. The man who knew that he sprang from Duke Ellington and James P. Johnson is the man who exercised a profound influence on John Coltrane at that crucial period in Coltrane's life, just before he struck out into the future. As I've already commented, he was a tremendous influence on Sonny Rollins. He moved forward, but he didn't move forward by burning bridges behind him. He represents really the continuity of jazz, the way you can go forward in jazz without losing touch with your roots.
Was he a special genius? What were those components?
Well, it's one of these things where you almost have to say, if you can't hear it, I can't explain it to you. He was, he was a strong player. He was really a vital band leader. He was perhaps most lastingly a great composer. And I think, here was this man who was supposed to be all hard angles and roughness and harshness, and yet he happens to be the composer of what is very possibly the most beautiful short form piece of music in 20th century America. I'm talking about Round Midnight. Again, to talk about the extreme adaptability and viability of his music. A few years after his death, I worked on a project with a now very widely recognized contemporary classical string quartet, the Kronos Quartet, a San Francisco-based group that I've been very friendly with the members of that group for years. And in the mid-'80s, at my urging, arrangements were written and an album performed by the Kronos Quartet with a little help from Ron Carter as a guest artist. Did an album, the music of Thelonious Monk. Now, I happen to think that was very well done, but we can talk about this in the terminology that was used centuries ago for Dr. Johnson, Ben Jonson, describing a dog that stood on its hind legs. The point was not whether he did it well; it's that he did it at all. These people played accurately and validly the music of Thelonious Monk. I cite that as just one extreme example of how far it can reach. But there are jazz musicians who never were in a position to see Monk perform, who are these days capable of playing his music. And his music, I'm quite sure, will continue to live on.
Orrin Keepnews, talking about Thelonious Monk on this 79th anniversary of the birth of Thelonious. Orrin, historian, jazz archivist, producer, main focus being the studio and the artist, and the result, the completed recording. He is an author. He has written The View from Within Jazz, writings from 1948 to 1987, published by Oxford University Press, and he has contributed so much to what we hear in the American jazz idiom. Orrin, thanks very much for renewing and talking to us from San Francisco.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to expound on one of my favorite subjects.
Well, you've introduced us in a very special way to the world of Thelonious Monk.